At least 300 million people are feared to be suffering from mental illness globally, and by 2040 it is feared to be the leading killer disease. I'm talking about depression. And 1 out of 4 Kenyans are feared to be suffering in silence from mental illness. These are statistics by World Health Organization and NexGen Newsplex, respectively. My name is Faisal Kassim, and welcome to the NexGen Show, where we are talking about mental health support system. These are scary facts that I assume they have scared you the way they have scared me as well. Like other diseases, giving an analogy, malaria, we know the symptoms, diarrhea, sleepless nights, headaches, and all that. What about mental illness? When you're suffering from malaria, typhoid, HIV, name it, there are medical facilities to go to, reachable medical facilities. What about mental illness? Accidents. We do have first aid classes, we have first aid companies, we have first aiders everywhere, ambulances running up and down, full of first aiders in them. What about mental illness? Mental illness has an act that goes way back to 1989, and it was revised in 1993 here in Kenya. But again, how practical is it? How well do you know about it? Is it being implemented? This is what we are talking about, mental health support system in the country amongst the youth. And joining me this evening to talk about, from my right hand, I'm gonna introduce you to a personal friend, a brother, Abdulaziz Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum.
Tell us something about yourself, briefly.
Okay. I'm Abdulaziz Muhammad. In this context, I am representing the voice of the majority. Most people who assume that mental health is not like a big problem per se. And I don't know if that, or you want more data about me?
So you're basically someone who came from a background where you did not believe that this is a real problem that exists.
Exactly. I've never seen mental health as something that needs so much attention. I used to hear about it and I thought maybe this is somebody who has gone crazy. That's when you categorize them as people suffering from mental health. But recently I've come to notice that it's something that it's behind every smiling face. Maybe you would see somebody very smiling, very active, but then in the next short break, somebody is going to the toilet or somewhere to just take antidepressants and all that. So it is something that shocked me, and I think I need to be the voice of most people who would think this thing is not a problem anymore. Exactly,
just proving the point that 1 out of 4 Kenyans are suffering in silence. And next to him is a special lady that I spoke to her. We've spoken and interacted before on phone, and she's one smart, amazing, brilliant lady, none other than Miss Muthoni Njogu, a therapist, qualified, certified.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you so much for having me in the panel. I think this is just coming at a very good time that we're having conversations about mental health. And you can definitely realize the importance of it based on the statistics. It's great to realize that we in the Ummah are realizing that our brothers, our sisters, our children, our parents, our loved ones are wrestling with some type of mental illness. So I think this is great, putting this together. It's really amazing.
For how long have you been in the psychology field?
Well, let me just say, including education?
Yes.
So I have an undergraduate in psychology and gender studies, and I am currently finishing up my master's in marriage and family therapy.
MashaAllah.
Shukran. And I have been actively practicing for the last 3 years.
MashaAllah. Again, that's immense experience right here tonight on the panel. And last but not least, and it gives me pleasure to confess that she's among the reasons as why we're having this discussion tonight. None other than Aminatuzahra Ahmed, who is a mental health supporter and a student of psychology and counseling.
Right. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you so much for having me here. I think the discussion on mental health has been so muted for so long, and we finally reached a place where we realize it's an epidemic, and now we need to do something about it. Personally, my experience with mental health started from very long ago, being a victim myself and then turning into a supporter and an advocate for better mental health, not just for myself, but for those around me. And so I feel extremely privileged to be in a setting where we are discussing something that has been so understated.
Thank you so much. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, our viewers back at home, greetings from my co-host, my brother that I miss being with on the set. That is none other than Karagania Mwamlole. He'll be gracing your screens soon. Now, on to the topic at hand. We are talking about tonight a student who completed his KCSE exam, committed suicide using his belt, not mentioning a few months ago a sister in Embakasi who committed suicide because of 2 months arrears, not mentioning the previous cases of students last year especially who committed, the number of students who committed suicide. So it is increasingly, rapidly growing mental issues. Why is this the case?
What makes it more visible is because we have social media, for example, that records a lot of these incidences. Now, in terms of why, I like to imagine that we are multifaceted human beings. And so what happens, for instance, in a socioeconomic system, like what we have now, inadvertently will affect an individual and how they move in the world. We do not live in isolation. We do not live in islands. So if you have experienced traumatic experiences as a child, for example, and witnessed domestic violence, that inadvertently affects you. So we have, I like to imagine we're in a perfect storm where we have all these different factors, this socioeconomic, the political, the personal. And if you...
what do you mean by personal?
Well, we have what we call developmental stages. The examples that you gave, these are young people. And from the time when one becomes a teenager going into young adulthood, young adulthood is about 20, 25 years old, you are severing the umbilical cord. We like to, it's a fancy word, individuation. All that means is you're trying to create your new separate identity from that of your parents, from that of your mother, from that of your father. And doing that without a context. There's not a context. We don't have a ritualistic system. Ritualistic in the sense that we have uncles and aunts who will support one as they're transitioning into a deeper understanding of themselves. So you're doing stuff in isolation.
Wow.
You're growing in isolation. And so when you come into challenges, which is part of the process of creating your new identity, and there's no resources to help you navigate that, it is an incredibly lonely place to be and scary. So the examples that you gave us of young people who've taken their lives, that is sometimes a way to stop the pain. The pain becomes incredibly unbearable, and the only way that they can see an end to that is taking their lives.
Is it the pain of not achieving what they wanted, or what exactly? What pain are you referring to? Anyway, if you're gonna hold on that, because I need to get facts from someone who's been doing it over time. And before we go into that, still stressing on the point why, according to the World Health Organization, 7 out of every 100,000 people in Kenya are suicidal, which is below Africa's average of 9 out of every 100,000 people. So out of your interaction and what you have been doing, why do you think, what makes them suicidal? What makes them go into depression?
I don't think there is something that we can pinpoint that says this is what makes people go into depression, or these are what make people go into depression and turn suicidal. There are so many factors that For example, stress, stress in the homes. We find children who come from homes with single parents, children who come from homes where their parents are divorced or where there's fighting, you know, such things like sexual assault, people who come from backgrounds of sexual assault, people who come from backgrounds where there is abuse between their parents. And such things weigh down on somebody's mental abilities to function as a normal human being. And so you find if they repress these emotions and if that repression goes on for such a long period of time, that is when we say they develop now depressive tendencies. So you don't develop depression all of a sudden or overnight. You know, these factors add up and ultimately reduce your ability to function as a human being, hence developing depression.
Wow. Wow. Abdulaziz, coming from a background that this is something that you always thought it was a fallacy, you thought it never existed, you thought this was just, sorry to put in the words of our religious scholars, some of them, when someone goes with some mental issues, it definitely be taken for ruqya and just understand maybe this is gene or maybe he's possessed or something. Psychologist Job Watene attributes the fact, by the way, the figure that I just mentioned, out of the suicidal rates, suicidal number that we have, the ratio of men to women is 11:3. That is, more men are becoming suicidal compared to women. One of this is attributed by Dr. Lukoye Atwoli, says men die in suicide more often than women because men use more lethal methods than women. And psychologist, again, Job Watene, says this is because women have some circles, they have support system amongst themselves, so they talk about such issues more often as compared to men. What made you as a person appreciate the mental illness existence and finally come to embrace it and take it as a challenge in today's world?
I can say I will borrow some of their points. I grew up in an environment where, like, we used to appreciate very small things, you know? Like, you know, the fact that you can have, let's say, you've had food on your table, or you've had a smaller, somebody telling you, like, you know, you are great, or you do something like this and this, you know? That simple things, like, made me never think about issues of, like, that's, you know, that those issues that maybe can make somebody feel like they're inferior, or maybe they are not a fit in the society, or maybe they are somehow lesser beings. So growing up in such a way, I used to appreciate, like, what's around me, and I could see, like, somebody suffering from I could never tell, like, somebody is suffering from depression or somebody. I would just say that somebody, he has stress, and maybe one day or 2 days they'll overcome. So one point I'd like to borrow from them, things like trauma that are hidden, things like self-actualization. They need to be somebody, and the inner unavailability of the resources to make you that somebody, and then you just look at yourself as a waste of space, you know? It is something that most people, when you come from a background that you don't have plenitude, you know, you appreciate the little things that you have every day, you know? And then I think it's less expectations. You expect less from the society because you wake up every day, you know, like, we have the same set of problems. We've been going through all this set of problems in a daily. There is no hope of change. There is no hope of whatever. So you just get used to problems. And then some other things that are affecting other people, you see, like, these things are not an issue to yourself. So until you come to somebody and fit yourself into their context and realize that this thing that somebody is highlighting as a problem, to them is a real problem, not to your context. So understanding people from a different context is what made me come to appreciate that mental health is something that is it's a real issue. You don't have to.
Issue
Yeah,
and needs
exactly,
to be given due diligence. Socioeconomic issues, political issues, personal development, broken marriages. These are some of the reasons as to why they are leading people go into depression. As Sister Aminatuzahra said, it's not something that happens overnight. It's a process. After the break, we're going to learn more about this process. What are signs and symptoms, and who is responsible leading the youth into depression? Not only the youth, but again, the general society. Please just throw your remote away and don't you go anywhere. Let's pay our bills. We're going to be back in a moment. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. We are still talking about mental health, and just before the break we mentioned some statistics from trying to get that page. Yes, we mentioned some statistics from World Health Organization, that is WHO, that says Kenya's rate of suicide ratio of men to women is 11:3. And it was backed by Dr. Lukoye Atwoli, who say that men use more lethal methods when committing suicide, which makes them more successful when wanting to die. I mean, when he wants to die, I mean, he means business. Let's do it. Yeah. Amina, how true are this?
I mean, they're facts given. That means they are true. However, we need to distinguish between men being successful in committing suicide and women being a majority in attempting suicide. You've given us the fact that they use more lethal methods. Therefore, there are more men successful in committing suicide and ending their lives. However, there's the other aspect of it where more women are met with suicidal thoughts, and more women go through the notions of attempting suicide, and maybe they're not as successful as the men. However, when we're comparing ratios, we need to compare the attempted suicide and the suicide being successful.
Oh, sure. And I want to bring in Ms. Muthoni. I mean, from this, as I mentioned earlier, psychologist Job Watene attributes this ratio or these figures. He says that women have their support system. They're like, hey girl, we need to talk. Yeah, they have those kind of issues, you know, they talk amongst themselves. Contrary, on the men's side, I mean, unakufa kisoja. Anything, you're just like, I'll handle it, it's never that serious and all that. So, I mean, what's your opinion on these facts?
I mean, I think it's definitely illuminates the ways that we are socialized. There's a lot more acceptance for women to be vulnerable with each other than it is for men. Men are socialized to be stoic, to be hard, to be a man.
Exactly.
Even at a very young age. And so even when they come into face with challenges, for instance, they are unable to create social structures that can support them when they go through transitions. So there's definitely some truth to that, and actually I'm really glad that Amina invited us to consider there is a difference between suicidal ideation, i.e. thinking about it, and actually taking one's own life, which is an end in and of itself.
It may be the ideation you cannot quantify because you don't have the facts, you don't know what people are thinking, when they're walking, when they're talking and stuff. Right?
Well, that is true, but then what I've also seen with my clients is they are able to express in very deliberate terms when they have suicidal ideations. They will say, I am thinking of doing this, I am thinking of doing that. And what I do is explore what that looks like. When you say you want to take your life, for instance, so how do you want to do this? What do you want to do? When do you want to do it? So suicidal ideations are symptomatic of other things going on. I like to imagine it as a bird in the canary. I mean, no, it's not a bird. What do you say? A bird in the canary in the mine, so to speak. I do want to say this because it's incredibly important to recognize that as our culture is aging, meaning we have a lot more young people than we have older people in terms of demographics, and men who have been for 20, 30, 40 years being productive members of their community, and now they're retired, and their sense of self and their sense of identity sort of withers with them. And so you're finding also that older men, our fathers, our grandfathers, are experiencing low to mild cases of depression, because on top of them retiring, you also have physiological and cultural issues and transitions that are happening. And so it's important to recognize what is happening to us holistically as a community. I do recognize that the show is specifically to young people, but you see, we don't live in isolation.
Yeah.
We don't live in isolation. True. And so it's good to recognize that depression isn't just, I'm using depression as an example because that is what you've brought to us. But depression or depressive episodes or depressive symptoms is not just specific to young people. We're also dealing with old people as well. So it's really across the board.
What's the ratio again from the clients that you have been seeing, old to young?
Okay, well, I see young people, so I see young adults. And
majority being the old or the young?
Wow, I'm a little old, so anyone who's younger than me is young to me. So, wow, I'm thinking about late 20s to mid 30s.
Are the majority?
Are the majority that I see. Then I also see mostly women. And I have expanded my reach, so I'm also getting to see Muslims as well, alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah.
Right, but it's a little slower. I find folks who are not Muslim are a lot more open to the idea of seeking help.
Interesting. I think that's because going back to the history, as we say, Muslims, not so many in the Muslim community appreciate the fact that mental health exists and needs to be taken with utmost serious and given due diligence. Anyway, moving on to our second issue on the table. Who is responsible? Who can we hold responsible when we're talking about mental illness and mental health and depression and what do you call it, unipolar, bipolar disorders and all those mental health, mental sickness? Who do we hold responsible? Where does the buck stops?
I don't know. That's such a big question.
Yes, it is. And we need to narrow down and see where did the rain started beating us.
Wow. I think the thing is I think that's a wrong question to ask. Because that gives like a singular focus. Amina mentioned earlier on that we have to think of it as systemic. So, for instance, if it could be trauma that someone experiences as a child, so can you say it's because of the parents? And then there's some people who experience trauma as well, but do not develop mental illnesses. Same experience, different response.
For as much as it's systematic, there are people within these systems.
However, we have just said that mental illness is like any other illness.
Yes,
it is like cancer and it is like malaria. Do we have a who for those?
They have causes.
They have causes, but you can't specifically pinpoint them.
If I'm putting up a dumping site behind my backyard and my neighbors contract cholera or typhoid, I mean that I'll be responsible for that, right? If I'm gonna have an abusive relationship with my wife and my kid become depressed, I'm gonna be responsible for that, right? If I'm part of a society that's putting a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation on a kid, and then he does not feel confident enough to perform the way we expect, and he falls into depression, we're going to be responsible, right?
Then that's the toxic masculinity that society develops. But who
Not only the society, but again, there is somewhere, there is a place that the buck stops. With whom does the buck stop? Where does the buck stop? If we are to talk about these issues, where do we start from? Okay, talk of government. Do we have enough medical facilities to handle mental issues, for example? Do we?
Wow. I think it's again, the systems. We have to think of it as systems. So there's what happens in your intrasystem.
Yeah.
Intrasystem means internal.
Yes.
So there are studies that show that there are those that have a genetic predisposition to mental illness, right? So you realize, wait, my guka, my shosho, my uncle.
Just like addictive, I assume maybe it might be curative, right?
Right.
Exactly.
So there's that. That's the intra. And then you have the inter, which is outside the individual, which I'm glad that you enumerated all those different examples, from what happens at home, what happens in terms of societal expectations, governments, cultural norms, the way that we view mental illness. We think of it as a characteristic of a human flaw, and which is not about that. It's not about that. And we have to realize that many of us no longer or do not have the tools and the skills of building resilience. A little stress, if you look at it in evolutionary way, it's important. For instance, think about the development of fire, for example. People were very cold, and then became really, really cold. And then they're like, you know what, we need to change this. We developed fire. A little stress is okay. But a little stress over a long period of time without the tools and the skills, both inward and outward, to balance it off, then it becomes problematic. And the thing is this, is the body never forgets.
The body or the brain?
The body, the brain, the whole interchange of mind, body. they never forget. They never forget. And so what happened to you at 5 years old, or in fact other studies that suggest that what happens when you're in your mother's womb plays a very big role in the ways that you move in the world.
Again, which begs the question, where is the backstop, Abdulaziz?
I would like just to bring a scenario of somebody growing up in a Kenyan context, in a Kenyan system.
Yes.
Okay? Like the first time that person will come to encounter mental health topic or mental health issues is when maybe there is a seminar.
Yeah.
Or it's when maybe they decide to do psychology.
Okay.
Or it's when maybe they're in the university and then maybe they're affected.
Maybe they're affected.
And maybe they are in the university and the university has imposed on them, they need to take a course on
that, a unit on psychology.
So you see, as much as we are looking for somebody who's responsible, and given the facts that you've given us, that nearly, I think, 1 out of 4 is likely to die, it is something that the government needs to treat with urgency. For example, in my context, like growing up, I'm now half a century old plus.
Oh, really? Mashallah.
So coming into knowing this thing is a real problem at that point of my life, it's like I've missed out on a very interesting thing that I should have. Maybe I've suffered, and maybe, as she said, some people have an inherent ability to overcome those things, Like, these are the kind of moments you start appreciating of the little things you've been doing to yourself. So I'm trying to say, like, is it, what about that standard 2, standard 3, standard 4? Does he know there's something known as mental health or mental issues? So, like, as much as people know about HIV, when was HIV declared a national epidemic? Then it was immediately inserted into the syllabuses.
Yes.
Students read about it. So I don't know why our curriculum has ignored such a topic which affects most of the students now. Like, for example, in the recent wave of pregnancy thing,
yes,
what do you think goes through the mind of that student who gives birth during exam?
Oh my.
You see? Like those kind of things, like the system needs to, first of all, appreciate that this thing is a problem. Second of all, develop ways of creating awareness so that even family members, the society knows, like, everybody is responsible to raising awareness about this issue, so that when so-and-so experiences that, oh, my world is not going well, or everything of mine is not falling into what I want them to be, so they know, like, this thing has an expiry date, you know? I can't feel like this for more than a month. If I feel like this for more than a month, then it means it's a problem, you know? Those kind of things, yeah?
Exactly. And unfortunately, my director is telling me that the time for this segment is up. Anyway, asking the question, where does the buck stop? Religious entities, how frequent do you talk about these issues in the members, in the youth gatherings, in the societal gatherings? How often do you talk about them? Government, how accessible are mental health facilities? Do you have enough counselors and psychologists? Parents back at home, how well does your child know him or herself? Do you help him in identifying himself? The space that our able sister, Ms. Muthoni, was talking about. Do you give that space? Do you support him or her in that space? All and that we are going to talk about them some other time. But again, in the last segment, we are coming to talk about the support systems. What can you do back there at home? She spoke about tools. What are the tools we need to identify that? He mentioned them as well. How do you know that you're affected? And what are the tools? What are the steps to take towards curative and becoming mental stable and very well? All this after this very short break. We're going to be back in a moment. Thank you so much, Nasor Marjan on my camera for giving me the countdown, and my director Suleiman of Tumbo, not mentioning our very able soundman Muhammad Otwell. Thank you so much. Fauzia, I've not forgotten about you, Harare and Sadiq Swale. Thank you so much, the crew. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about mental health support system. What are some of the symptoms that someone is suffering from any of the mental diseases?
Each disease has its very specific set of symptoms. What can be considered a rule of thumb across the spectrum is functionality. And let me explain what that is when I speak of functionality is this, is it difficult for you to get out of bed?
Really?
Yes, literally.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Are you being serious now?
Absolutely.
Getting out of bed should not be mistaken like, oh, I feel lazy. Is it difficult for me to think about socializing and to think about being in the outside world?
We're waking up.
And this is what I was explaining about functionality in terms of getting out of bed. Like, does it feel excruciatingly painful to remove the covers, put your feet on the ground, and stand?
Oh, okay.
Right? Is it difficult for you to open the door? Right? Is it difficult for you to imagine going to take a shower or brush your teeth? Right? Or even going to do wudu so you can pray? Is it the idea of being around people is excruciating? It becomes physical pain, literally physically painful.
What?
Yes, and depending on the severity of the symptoms, there are people who have difficulty even rolling over, because the psychological symptoms have now taken a physical manifestation. It's become psychosomatic now. And so when we talk about how do you identify what's going on with your family member, look at simple things like do they like to be by themselves? Solitude, but solitude in the sense that it's extended. It's not just 1 day or 2 days. We talk about 2 months, 3 months, 4 months.
Maybe they need some time off, maybe.
They could be taking a break.
Maybe.
You could just have like, excuse me, like complete burnout. I mean, that goes. But then you're looking at isolation, you're looking at what I mentioned, functionality, you're looking at negative intrusive thoughts, meaning you keep saying, I am worthless, I don't amount to much, I'm silly, I'm stupid, and that becomes a mantra on top of everything else. If they say, things like, you'll be better off if I'm not here. And this is extended for at least a month.
What?
Yes. This and like I said, this is just the common symptoms when you're looking at making an assessment in terms of if someone is going through a mood or a psychotic episode. Then let me say something as well. Not everybody can do an assessment. And this is why if this is happening for you, or someone who's experiencing this, it's good to look for a professional, well-trained therapist or counselor who will be able to do an assessment. Because with mental illnesses, mood or psychotic disorders, it's not like you can go get an x-ray, right? Or you can't go get like a blood work done, right? So you need to make sure that you are looking for someone who's accredited, who has the education, preferably one who has bare minimum a bachelor's and not a diploma.
Not even a diploma?
No.
Oh my.
You're doing a disservice to yourself and your loved one. And I'm not saying folks who are doing diplomas are, not skilled. But you see, because you're going to utilize very specific tools to do a diagnosis, and you talk about DSM-5, and so you need to be able to be with someone who, working with someone who knows what they're doing. So it's incredibly important, because some people get misdiagnosed. You could go to someone and they tell you, and after one session, your loved one or yourself, you have this, and you discover, no, actually you have something else. So it's incredibly important to choose someone who is competent
in their
work. Yes.
Shocking. Amina, did they come to you? Did you see them and notice them, or what happened? Tell us some of your stories.
Because I have worked with multiple individuals, and in the age bracket of very early teens, so between 12 to around 20, 21, I find that they don't approach me with a problem initially. It takes some digging. And therefore, the biggest thing that you can do...
So do you notice it in them?
Yes, personally, I believe I do notice a shift.
What are some of the things? What exactly do you notice? What are some of the things you note?
For example, if you as Faisal enjoy going outside, and I'm constantly seeing you outside, but I notice 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 2 months, I haven't been seeing you outside. If you're an individual who loves reading, and suddenly you have no interest in reading, things that you're passionate about, but for some reason you have stopped doing, that is when it raises question. Because being unable to do that which makes you happy is then a problem. So I notice that. And when you approach somebody because you notice that, maybe, as she has said, it is a mood. It is something that they're going through, but it could be more than that. And therefore, the biggest thing that you can do in that moment is listen. You cannot be intrusive. You cannot force somebody to say why they're doing what they're doing, because sometimes they do not understand it themselves. Therefore, you just need to be the voice of listening. You need to be the person who is there for them when they feel like the rest of the world is not.
Interesting. So what are some of the basic tools maybe the professionals can advise? As you say, if you cannot do what you love doing, then it becomes a problem. So if I cannot eat and I love eating, then it becomes a problem. So I should seek help, right?
Right.
If I cannot take mango juice and I love mango juice, and the mango juice is not rotten, it's very okay. So I should seek help, right? So what are some of the tools, now that you've already mentioned some of the symptoms, and we are really glad for that, what can we do? For example, my younger brother is suffering, is a victim. Just an example. Or my neighbor or my colleague is a victim and maybe not confident enough. Because I mean, there are personality issues coming into play here. We have introverts, we have ambiverts, we have people who just will not talk to a stranger. You know, for such cases, what can I do as an individual at my own capacity? And the viewers back at home, the parents who are watching us.
Well, I think the fact is just to be sensitive, to be incredibly sensitive that the person in your life is struggling. I know we make a lot of jibes, but we always say, oh, I'm feeling bipolar, oh, you're being schizophrenic, I'm feeling very depressed, right? And somebody next to you is really struggling to get out of bed, and then you say, I mean, so I would suggest to practice intentional kindness. And I'm glad what Amina said is everybody's in different places in their journey, and sometimes somebody doesn't know what's really going on, but they know something's going on. And so if that's the individual in your life, being intentional, being kind, just holding space, whatever they need. I have clients who come and for 45 minutes they don't talk. And
you must be very patient. 45 minutes they don't talk and they're just there. What do you do? Drink coffee?
No. That coffee will be distracting. Unless they want coffee, then I'll get them coffee or water or juice. But if they just need you to just sit.
Oh, I appreciate the bachelor's thing.
If they need you to just sit. And I know we're very quick to look for solutions because we want to alleviate their suffering. It's instinctual, it's what makes us human. You want to fix it. But there's some things you can't fix. You can't fix in that way, but you can fix in holding space and asking the person, how would you like me to support you? Even when they don't know what it is. What do you need? And how would you like me to hold space for you? And then from there, that cultivates safety. Safety is very important. And from safety, then they can say, I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling that way, and then you can then start looking for resources. And this is where tools come in, because we have Dr. Google, right?
Yeah, uncle.
We have like Dr. Google.
In every family there's that uncle who knows everything.
Uncle who knows everything. Knows everything. And so I suggest we have 2 psychology associations in this country that have a database of therapists around the country. So if you're in Mombasa, for example, and you want to know, there are ways you can contact either one of the associations and they're going to connect you.
What are the associations?
There's KPCA and there's another one. So I can always give you that information.
KPCA?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are associations in the country for therapists who are trained.
Fully trained?
Fully trained, yes. We have to always put that there. Yes.
Super.
Yeah.
Amina, you mentioned listening. You need to give that listening, that ear without judging to that person. Apart from that, what else have you been doing and what are the results?
As she said, being sensitive, but also being aware, with the individuals who I have worked with and who I have rather supported, I realize, especially at a certain age group where you're in your early teens, between early and late teens, they have this thing of saying, oh my God, I feel like throwing myself off a bridge today, ha ha ha.
Oh.
And it turns into a ha 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 moment. Or, oh my God, can you imagine what it would be like if I just didn't exist? They turn it into a joke. But when you are aware and when you are sensitive towards such, then it opens you up to thinking and asking that person, but why? Why do you feel this way? Because today it's, oh, I just wish I didn't exist in this space, maybe because of school. But tomorrow it's, I wish I didn't exist in this space and I'm going to do something about it. Therefore, just being aware and being sensitive. Also, forming a support group. We have cancer support groups where people who are cancer patients sit together and just share their mutual pain. And that allows them to kind of bond and become stronger emotionally. We should do the same for mental illnesses because they need that support. And who better to get support from than from somebody going through the same thing as you? And I think something that has personally worked for me is being a voice of encouragement and telling the individual it is not your fault. Despite everything that you are feeling, despite all your irrational fears, despite everything that society has been telling you that you are doing wrong, it is not your fault. And humor, you know, it is easy to make somebody laugh by a simple joke, but we know the effects of laughing and the hormones that they produce in your body, the feel-good hormones as we call them. Making somebody laugh, simple things like that. But by the time you get to a therapist, you know, by the time you say, okay, this problem is beyond me, you also just need to ask yourself, what is it that I can do in the moment, you know? But you need to be that voice of reasoning, because these people exist with such deep irrational fears. Some people have these images, self-images, you know, like I need to be perfect, I need to be the perfect mother, I need to be the perfect child, I need to be the perfect student. And those irrational fears are something that you now need to start disputing even before they get professional help. And so those are the few things that as laymen we can do to assist the ones who, you know, are with us in the moment who are suffering.
Wow. Wow. Our half a century man.
No, don't
Tell
pull
us
that.
your parting shot as we conclude the show.
First of all, I need to correct that. I meant a quarter of a century. So
Okay.
it was just a slip of the tongue. I appreciate the contribution from their so resourceful contribution that I think anybody who will watch this show will take it and use it to their benefit or to the benefit of their loved ones. The one question I'd like to pose, like for example, some people are aware of these tendencies and they can easily notice them in other people. What if in a scenario where you notice them in yourselves? Like, yeah, now that I'm aware of these issues, I now see myself being, asking myself some certain question. As you said, not being able to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I'm just putting it that, you know, like now, people are aware what should be their first point of action for laymen who are out there and maybe they will encounter with such things due to new pressures, because every day comes with a new pressure. Yeah.
Well, if you recognize some of these things are part of your experience, I would suggest seeking someone you feel safe with, someone that you feel honors you, and share that. Say, you know, this is how I feel, and I need some help. And that would be one of the biggest steps. That would be the first step to do. And then, as I mentioned, from there are amazing resources around, utilizing, for instance, associations. And I think we'll put contact information somewhere, right?
Yeah, sure.
That then can be able to direct people to where they need support. Support is there. It's just that because this has been marred with silence, unless you really know what you're looking for, you won't really know where to get resources.
Wow, interesting. And the contacts are just coming right now. My directors are on my neck to end the show. not mentioning the person behind this camera, Sadiq, behind this camera, and really pressuring me like, Faisal, you need to end this show. And I mean, I loved it. I benefited a lot. As you can notice, I'm not ending the show with the vigor that I started with, because as the show went on, it went to be more emotional and so touching and so empathetic, for lack of a better word. I have been Faisal Kassim. 40497 is our SMS line. Horizon TV Kenya is our Facebook page. At Horizon TV Kenya is our Twitter handle, and Horizon TV Kenya is our Instagram page. Like us, follow us, tell us what you think. Text us. You need more information, you need their contacts, tell us. We're going to get it for you. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.